Well, I really enjoyed going through all your stuff, your website. Like you've got a specific vibe and kind of a playfulness about all this. While there's like these conversations can get into the weeds as far as like dorking out on the science part of things.
Yeah.
But my background, because I also come at this from being somebody who's there to kind of ground people, and my background is really kind of in nervous system work. I totally got into this, and I got connected to you through a therapist friend of mine who found your stuff and is working on some health challenges.
Mm.
And so it was cool that that I feel like there's been more and more of these things kind of happening. And as I was you shared part of the book that you're in the process of writing. The one word that kind of stuck out to me was was homeostasis. Kind of with your background, kind of coming from a Lakota nation, and also being an athlete, and being diving deep into sciences. It felt like the one thing that we're really trying to do is thinking about the home, our earth, and about how do we create this balance.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and when if you stumbled upon that word in the book, you probably stumbled upon the word that's usually like right before it, which is electrical homeostasis.
Hmm.
That's something I really try to drive home there, because a lot of people when they think of homeostasis, they think of many things as far as our health and balance in the body, but one thing that I definitely think has been neglected in our health is that electrical homeostasis side of
Yeah.
things. And so I brought that point up quite a bit in the book, which is finished, by the way. I'm waiting on some printing to get done for Barnes and Noble, and then it'll be available on there. But anybody out there that wants to read it, like the full thing, so the hardcovers will be 2 volumes, because it was just so dang thick
it's,
that I
it's
had
going to
to.
be like 800 pages or something, right?
Yeah, I had to split it up into 2 books, so I had to do it that way. But if you want to read the ebook is still a really cool experience. There's some cool rain in the background that's programmed in, so it's a fun experience. So
Who did the illustration for it?
I did. So it was a mixture.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was a mixture of me using Canva, Adobe, and some other different softwares, and just kind of throwing it all together. But my whole goal with that is that I just wanted to give people like a cool kind of world to experience this from.
Yeah.
And so I created this city, this massive kind of cyberpunk city called Voltopolis. And so it's your good mixture of textbook style. You're learning the science of grounding, but you also have this fictional story that's going on throughout this whole setting throughout the
Right.
book. So it's definitely
I,
fun.
I think it's an important thing to have, especially when it gets into the sciences. That's one of the things. So I was an English major, which is also the reason that I picked up on things like homeostasis. But I that's that, and I'm a musician as well. So like there things like this always appeal to me because I find just dry textbooks to I'll enjoy parts of it, and then it'll just fall off for me. So to be able to engage at a story level and with the character and that kind of stuff is really cool.
Yeah, and I tried, I tried to make it for somebody, for a skeptic. Essentially, I tried to
Yeah.
make the book for a skeptic. There a lot of people come at grounding from kind of that. Well, I don't really know about this kind of point of view, but I also wanted to make it, for the layperson too, and that's where that story part of it comes in. It makes it interesting, it makes it compelling, and it makes it fun. So all in all, I think it turned out pretty good. I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it, so I think it'll appeal to both of those demographics there.
Yeah. So what's your background? What did you study this stuff, formally in some way? Is it
Mm.
something that yeah, I know you're an athlete. Your website is the Grounded Athlete. Are you a runner? Is that your background?
Yeah. I run track. So kind of how I got started in this whole grounding thing is I came from a Lakota culture, as you said. So I've always kind of been involved with that earth centric kind of mentality, belief. So 20 years later, I go to school, a small school in Iowa. I go to undergrad. I go to graduate school. I study physics, and it was while I was running track. I was basically looking for ways to improve my performance, improve my recovery.
Yeah.
And one day I was driving home and I was listening to this podcast talk about grounding, And I was a skeptic. I was just like, I don't know if I just go be barefoot on the earth, all of these things are going to happen. And I
Yeah.
started implementing it. I started sleeping grounded. I started using my recovery times in between reps on the track grounded. And I just immediately noticed, I was like, wow, I'm sleeping a lot better. I'm recovering a lot better. I'm feeling a lot better in workouts. There's definitely something going on here. And so from there, I kind of learned that there's a plethora of different things going on, as far as like positively impacting human health that people need to know about. And so
Yeah.
I just kind of became obsessed from there. And this is what I've been doing for the last 5 years. But I had initially come upon grounding right around the end of 2018, as I was getting ready for a new season of track. But ever since I've just been involved with breaking these things down and trying to help spread this message.
Very cool. And it's just recently I've uh, through a couple of different podcasts that I listened to. One with Dr. Jack Cruz, who you probably know a little of. You know, a lot of his work is talking about light grounding, and I mean, a lot of it has to do with light and ground. You
Yeah.
know, so but a lot of I think what we the reason that we're skeptical is because we've all pretty much grown up in a world now where we're surrounded by bright lights, technology, electricity, and just don't really have much of a sense of, the nature of what's happening with the earth, the circadian rhythms and all those things. And we don't even realize how much our body electrically is being affected by this. So, for the skeptic, where do you start kind of talking about that part of, kind of replenishing the system or rebalancing the system?
Yeah, and so if initially if I come across someone that's skeptical of the practice of grounding, I usually direct them to an outlet on their wall. On that wall outlet, there's a small port. It's that bottom port on the wall outlet.
Yeah, yeah,
What that's connected to is usually a grounding rod outside of the building. And what does that do? That essentially gives any stray current, excessive electrical energy in the electrical system, a place to go. And so it's the same thing with biological systems. Any excess electrical energy that's built up on the body, which is pretty common these days with our non-native electromagnetic environment, that's built up on the body. Grounding gives that excessive electrical energy that's built up on the body a place to go. And so what that contributes to is your body's electrical homeostasis. The electrical state of your body is meant to be synchronized with that of the earth. That's how we evolved.
right.
Only in the last 100 years have we started separating ourselves from that with insulating materials like rubber soled shoes,
Yeah,
being inside all day with buildings. So I usually try and start from that perspective. This is a very standard practice in the electrical industry. I'm just trying to apply it to biological systems, because they are very similar in ways.
and for people who are becoming more, I think where a lot of people are entering this is not necessarily the barefoot on damp earth. They're sort of coming into it through these pads now that you can purchase, that you're supposed to have against, have skin to skin to mat contact with, and basically you're putting that little port into that circle hole below the two lines on the electrical wall. So explain what the difference might be in terms of, your point of view. I'm assuming you might think one is better than the other, or it's maybe a matter of what you have access to in the moment.
Yeah. Before I answer that, I did want to say, so like, what is grounding essentially? Is it's just being it's your body being at the same electrical potential as the earth. And
Yeah,
so that can
yeah,
be done outside. It can be done inside with the products there.
yeah.
Do I think one is better than the other? From an electrical standpoint, I don't think one is better than the other because
Hmm.
the voltage reading that you're going to get on a multimeter is going to be the same. The only reason I would say being outside directly on the earth is better for you is because you're in a more natural environment, a less
Yeah,
polluted environment. So I would say that's the only reason that being outside in a natural environment, grounding is going to be better for you than being indoors. But as far as a voltage reading that a multimeter is going to give you when you're using products inside, there's going to be no difference. Your body voltage is going to drop to the same value.
yeah,
But when it's important to know, I think, when you're using those products indoors, that you have to be testing these things. You have to know if they work. And two things, two things that I recommend people to get if they're going to be using these products. One is an outlet checker, and two is a multimeter. And these are very inexpensive things to get. You can
Yeah,
get on
yeah,
Amazon, you can get them from Walmart. But how the outlet tester works is you just plug it into the wall, and there's a series of lights on it, and it'll essentially tell you if the electrical system is grounded. That's step number one. And then step number two is that you're actually using the multimeter to test the product. So, when the body voltage reading that you're getting on the multimeter, once you're in contact with that grounding product, the mat, the sheet, what have you, there should be a voltage drop that actually
okay,
tells you that the product's working. Because if it's not,
gotcha.
if it's connected to an improperly grounded electrical system, it can be counterproductive because this thing is conductive. This whole mat, the sheet is conductive. And so what does that mean? It means it can essentially act as an antenna for ambient non-native electromagnetic radiation. So it can pick that up. So that's why it's really important to make sure these things actually work. The electrical system's actually grounded.
Hmm.
For the most part, you're going to be okay because it's pretty standard electrical code for electrical systems to be grounded, but
Yeah,
it's always nice to be sure.
yeah. So I know with your background as a Lakota, you mentioned a little bit in the book that you had or you were introduced to different practices. Were you aware of the grounding nature of things that you were learning when you were younger?
No, I was just always told I was just being barefoot. That was a big part of like all of these
Yeah,
different practices that we were involved with. Like, when you go on a reservation and you're kind of exposed to the things that we do, it's kind of crazy because a lot of people are kind of taken aback because it's kind of like going in back in time a little bit
yeah,
to witness our traditions and the things that we do. But a lot of those things that we do them barefoot. And I'm sure that question did arise in my head at one point, like why can't I wear shoes right now? Why can't I wear shoes during these practices, during
yeah,
sweat lodge and during Sundance? Yeah, I mean, being barefoot is a big part of those customs. But did I realize what was going on, or if I'm sure they did understand to some extent, like that. I mean, a lot of native cultures, a lot of native tribes, they hold the earth as sacred and healing, and so you always want to be in contact with it. And where I'm at now is that's that electrical contact. So
yeah,
it kind of, in a way, it did bring things full circle for me, like coming from that culture and then doing what I'm doing now. So.
yeah. It's interesting to me because I did spend about 10 days up at Turtle Mountain
Mm,
reservation and doing some work there, and was as part of the exchange, I was introduced to a whole bunch of different traditions. I got to do a sweat,
mhm,
a very cool experience. But now I'm in, and this was like maybe a few years before I ended up in the field that I'm in, which is kind of healing arts work,
mhm.
and and I've also taught movement for 25 years as well. So that's been a big part of my work, and I have very sensitive hands. I mean, that's sort of part of how I ended up in this work in the first place. I think maybe comes from being a musician and having to really tune into the people around me. But when I've worked with grounding mats now, and even now that I know a little bit more about the science of some of this stuff, and I go outside barefoot, I'm pretty attuned to how my body feels and changes. With the electrical mats, I can almost feel the vibration change in my body. I'm sure you have this experience as well.
Yeah.
And actually, today, just since I knew we were going to be doing this, I decided to do a little grounding before this, and it,
Awesome.
it was kind of great.
Awesome. Awesome.
Um, but I kind of wonder, if a lot of there's, I mean, we can look all over the world at different traditions of people who have practiced and had this kind of experience with the earth, and traditions that are based on this connection with the earth. I'm sure that people over time have lost a little bit of that their ability to really feel at this deeper level, because we have access to getting food at the stores, not having to find our food, and so that also diminishes our experience of sort of the attunement that we have with all of our senses to the planet itself. So my feeling when I start hearing people having a lot of health challenges, and reading what I've been reading the last few years, I just find it's more and more important for people to really have that time outside of urban environments, and especially, contact with the earth.
Yeah, not only is that grounding you biophysically, that's grounding you spiritually, mentally. Like there's a lot that entails with, just getting yourself out of that environment. You again, like what you're saying, we're constantly exposed. We're constantly dealing with all of these things that are so unnatural for our body on a daily basis. Two 300 years ago, if we had all of these things that are surrounding us, like our bodies are just like, what is going on with all of these things that we're using and we're utilizing? But yeah, it just ground, even if grounding didn't have these benefits, these electrical benefits, electrical homeostasis and all that, just getting outside and being in nature, just what that does for your mental well-being, for your spiritual well-being, that's a huge part of it too.
Yeah, and so, and you talked a little bit in the book about the different properties of grounding in terms of. Can you explain, if we can go into the weeds of that just a little bit? What how what the necessity is to get this activity, this negative electron activity, to our bodies, and how that balances things.
Absolutely. Before we get to that, I just want to give you a heads up. My camera might die, so what I do is I swap the battery out really quick. It'll take
Okay.
about 5 seconds. So just
Okay.
if
So,
that happens,
all right. Sounds
um,
good.
but yeah, to your kind of so inflammation, oxidative stress. So before I get to that, I do want to talk about something that's called the big three. And
Hmm.
so these are essentially what all of these benefits kind of stem from, at least in my opinion. I kind of try to break grounding down to its core mechanisms and then go from there. So the big three with grounding, what's going to happen when you ground is that number one, it's going to increase the density of negative charge in your body. That goes back to that electrical homeostasis that we had talked about earlier. Number two is that it attenuates the excessive inflammation, oxidative stress response in the body. And then number three is that it charges this water protein matrix battery. That might be a little bit more to do with crews that you've learned about
Yeah. Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that goes along with each one of these big three, but I think these are kind of the core mechanisms. But
Yeah.
number two is that grounding. It resolves, isn't completely resolved, but it helps resolve excessive inflammation and oxidative stress. And so if you look at what's killing people around the world, the number one thing that's killing people is it's chronic low grade inflammation, inflammatory disease, non
Hmm.
communicable disease, heart disease, neurodegenerative disease, cancer, diabetes, all of these different conditions. So when you're looking for things that will alleviate these conditions, you've got to kind of find the common denominator between all of these things. And one of the common denominators is inflammation. But not only inflammation, is that it's equally as deadly sister is excessive oxidative stress. So if you do any search in PubMed and you look through all these articles, you search disease and inflammation and oxidative stress, you're going to find one where you find the other. So
Right.
if we can influence one of these facets of chronic disease, inflammation or oxidative stress, by proxy, we're going to influence the other. So where grounding comes into the picture is with oxidative stress. And so you have these things that a lot of people are familiar with called free radicals or
Hmm.
reactive oxygen species, reactive nitrogen species, what have you. But essentially what these are these reactive species, these reactive molecules that are looking for electrons to stabilize themselves. And so your body has its own endogenous antioxidant system. These are enzymatic, non-enzymatic antioxidants, glutathione, superoxide dismutase, all these various molecules. But more often than not, our bodies kind of get overwhelmed with these free radicals, these reactive species. And when this imbalance occurs, favoring these reactive species, you end up with oxidative stress. And when you end up with a lot of oxidative stress, what's going to come along with that? Inflammation. And so these two processes are going to fuel these conditions that are killing everybody.
Hmm.
Number one killer is chronic non-communicable disease. So where grounding comes into the picture is with that oxidative stress side of things. So what's happening when you electrically connect to the earth? You have these free electrons infiltrating your body, contributing to your body's electrical homeostasis, increasing the density of negative charge in your body. But where they're coming in specifically with that oxidative stress is it's electrons. What are those reactive species looking for? They're looking for electrons to stabilize themselves.
Hmm.
And so, in grounding, I always say is the number one antioxidant. It's the most effective antioxidant. It doesn't need to be digested and absorbed through the intestinal tract. There's a lot of barriers to entry for enzymatic, non-enzymatic antioxidants that grounding electrons, conducted antioxidants just don't have to deal with. And that's why I always say this is going to be your number one antioxidant. And on top of that, I think that has to do with something that's called the antioxidant paradox, which is the low efficacy, the low. So, like in studies, people that are given antioxidants, they don't work very well.
Mm.
I think it's because of those barriers to entry, and this ties into something called the inflammatory barricade, and it deals with the body's matrix. Sorry, I'm kind of going everywhere right now, but essentially where grounding is going to come into the picture here is by giving the body electrons to help resolve this excessive oxidative stress response. Only when it's excessive, because inflammation, oxidative stress are great things. They're normal processes in the body. It's just when they become excessive, when they last a long time, that's when problems can arise.
And is it a two-way conductor? Like, if we think about it, the way the grounding unit works in our wall, that's to ground or put into the earth that extra energy, right? Is that sort of what ends up happening with grounding? Are we just attracting these negative electrons, or are we also dumping something?
So more often than not, our bodies are electron depleted. And so
Yeah,
more often
interesting.
than not, it's going to be electrons coming into our body and basically saturating our body's electron stores. And this kind of goes into the matrix that I had mentioned earlier. Your body has this, essentially, it's this whole body redox system. These channels of proteins and ground substance, specifically this ground substance. This is a part. So like when you look at somebody's body, a lot of people when they try and envision that from like a biological perspective, they think this person's body is made of cells, but it's actually mostly the space in between cells.
Oh
That's
yeah,
called yeah, that's called the extracellular matrix.
right.
And a big part of that extracellular matrix is called the ground substance. And what the ground substance is it's basically this mixture of glycosaminoglycans and proteoglycans and glycoproteins. But these glycosaminoglycans, they're heavily sulfated and they trap a lot of water and they're negatively charged. And this is distributed all throughout your body. And so what you essentially have here are you have these stores of negative charge all throughout your body. And they can become depleted over time. If you're insulated your whole life, you never have that electrical contact with the
Yeah,
earth.
totally.
Yeah. And so the benefits of having that whole body redox system is that your body can pull from it for whatever it needs for energy production, driving that proton motive force in the mitochondria to produce ATP,
Hmm.
reducing excessive oxidative stress. There's a plethora of different reasons that, it's beneficial to have this whole body redox system distributed throughout it.
Interesting. So my work has been primarily around autonomic nervous system dysfunction,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you can understand how it relates to what you're talking about,
Yeah.
because when we are in these fight or flight states, or when we kind of shift into that sympathetic nervous system response, that is where we basically go into attack mode. Not just thinking about it externally as we do if sort of fighting our way out of a bad situation, but it does the same thing internally. So it's where inflammation, histamines, and all these things come from. And I'm always looking for ways for people. My work on some level is, and it's making me think a lot, because I've studied polarity therapy and these kinds of things. I sort of understand how we are polar beings. I know how energy exits the body. I've witnessed these things over the course of 26 years in my practice. So I'm kind of curious as to, like, does that autonomic nervous system, is it really pulling to balance from that negative electron charge? Will that basically be a big part of rebalancing that autonomic nervous system? I'm guessing yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are ways, as of assessing how balanced your autonomic nervous system is. And
Yeah.
one of those ways is through HRV. HRV is a very easy way to assess that. But what grounding is essentially going to do is it's going to improve vagal tone,
Right.
vagal balance, whatever you want to call it. Essentially, how so? Like, as you know, your body's kind of constantly in this tug of war in the autonomic nervous system between the
Yeah.
sympathetic and parasympathetic. But grounding, so like the direct way of seeing this is through HRV, or heart rate variability. What grounding's been shown to do is essentially improve people's HRV and thus their vagal tone,
Yeah.
and that's huge. And I think that's the number one reason people feel so good when they're grounding, because like you said earlier, people are constantly in this hypersympathetic state. They're
Yeah.
always in this, fight or flight, go mode. And grounding is essentially pulling them right back towards the middle. Not too much parasympathetic, but right towards the middle.
Yeah.
Because it can do the opposite effect too. There are people that are kind of in this hyper parasympathetic state.
Yeah.
So
I haven't
grounding
found too
is,
many of them, to be honest.
yeah, they don't exist, but you don't see them very often, but they do exist. But like, and that just goes to show that grounding is a highly contextual thing. It just depends on where you find yourself,
Yeah.
as far as the health spectrum goes. So like, an easy example would be that example. So like, I have someone in the hypersympathetic state, hyperparasympathetic state. Grounding is going to do two different things for them. It's going to pull them in kind of opposite directions. So really, how grounding is going to affect someone is really, really specific and tailored to that person.
And
So
it's about tone, right? I mean, this is a lot of what we're always trying to do. Tone would be kind of that middle ground, that
yep,
balance.
yep.
So I'm guessing that it could tone any number of systems in the body.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a great number of things that grounding does physiologically, as far as autonomic tone, cardiovascular efficiency, immune response. But a lot of it, and these are all intertwined things. They all relate to each other. You affect one thing in the body, you're going to affect all these other things,
Right.
because grounding is that universal regulating factor.
Yeah.
Grounding, the earth below us, the sun above us, these are universal regulating factors. And the
Hmm.
fact that they're free and they're so high ubiquity has caused a lot of people to kind of overlook them. And I know Jack Cruz, who you mentioned earlier, he really kind of brings a lot of the light side of things into the picture. And kind of light is all the rage right now, but I'm trying to squeeze grounding in there a little bit, because that's also a very important part of the equation.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, and this is what I get into with people that I'm working with most of the time. When we are, and the way the nervous system works is that depending on what our history, I'm always looking at the whole person's story. But depending on what our history is, we may become sort of programmed to, be our systems may become programmed to behave a certain way, so that we kind of sometimes, for people who have had histories of trauma or some dysregulation, their nervous system almost always goes towards fight or flight first before it regulates. And what I try to tell people is that's kind of that fight or flight response is the big spender in the body. That's where we're overusing our energy a lot of times. And in terms of grounding, and in terms of light, and it doesn't matter what we're talking about, a lot of times what we're trying to do is just improve that energy regulation, so that we get to keep some of that for whatever it is that we want to do. That's what most people are looking for out of improving their health.
Yeah.
It's not just the absence of disease, but actually I want to do something with my life.
Yes, yes,
Which
exactly.
is where it seems like this is where you started in your journey.
Mhm.
And I'm guessing your head is always kind of in that ATP production and metabolic process, and that kind of stuff, and how to kind of boost those things, right?
Yep, exactly, exactly.
So any tricks for us? Anything that you can kind of suggest in terms of maybe shifting to making time for this kind of thing, or things that you've learned through your process?
Yeah, I get a lot of people that message me or mention to me, I just don't have time. I don't have time to do this in my day, and that's a very difficult statement for me to have sympathy for, because like it's so easy. It's so easy to do. Like you can make a $30 investment and you can put that thing right on your bed underneath your pillow. However long you sleep, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours,
Yeah.
that's 6, 7, 8, 9 hours right there. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to think. You were grounded your whole night of sleep. It's that easy. Um, but yeah, so you do have time to ground, if especially if you want to make that $30 investment. That's an easy way to do it. That doesn't require a lot of effort, a little bit of testing. Lay it on your bed and sleep on it. You can use it. If you got the mat, you can use it as a mouse pad. There's so many different ways you can utilize that
Put
thing.
your feet on it under your
Yeah, put
desk.
your feet on it. There's a plethora of different ways you can use that thing. But yeah, and it there isn't there isn't an ideal time that you need to be grounded. I mean, ideally, 24/7, 365. That's how long we're
Mm,
meant to be
mhm.
grounded. That's
Yeah,
what our
right.
bodies are meant for. But I get a lot of questions. It's just like, how long do I need to ground to see these benefits? AKA, how little can I ground to see the
Yeah,
benefits of
yeah,
it? And I always give the most annoying answer in the world, is that it depends. Kind of going back to that contextual thing where how grounding affects people, is it just depends on how long you've been insulated your whole life. What kind of inflammatory state you find yourself in. If you're dealing
yeah,
with certain chronic ailments, the more you're going to need to ground. So this kind of ties back to what I was talking about earlier with the matrix. There's something called inflammatory preparedness. So that is essentially how saturated your body is with free electrons. And so when your body does come across something that, some kind of ailment, some kind of disease or something, your body is able to pull from this whole body redox system to help with that ailment, with that condition. But the more you ground, the more you're kind of building that inflammatory preparedness. So when something does happen, which it probably will, your body will be more prepared for it.
yeah,
Grounding isn't the one all be all key to disease, fixing things, but it certainly helps. And I genuinely believe that. So when those things ultimately do come along in life, you're going to be more prepared. Your body's going to be more ready for something like that to happen, and it's going to act accordingly. But if you were to take kind of the average of all of these studies that I've written about, it ranges from instantaneous effects to it took a full night of sleep to see these effects. But I would, I'd say like 20, 30 minutes. A lot of those studies are going to average out to probably about 2 hours. But yeah, anything is better than nothing. I think a lot of people would probably come to that conclusion, but it depends. As much as you can get in a day, and you're gonna feel better in that moment, I think, right away. And I think a lot of people are going to become hooked to it because it makes them feel good, like instantly. And so you're going to want to do it more. So, but if you're struggling to find time, get a grounding mat. At least get some time outside, natural grounding on a natural surface like grass or soil, 5, 10 minutes a day. And I think that'll take you a long way by itself. So.
yeah. And especially depending on what your health challenges have been or what your history of health challenges are. I know Jack Cruz was talking about different people that he's meeting with, or they're recovering from some kind of cancer or something, that he suggests, I want you to go down to Honduras for 3 months, and basically, like, there's specific places where he thinks light is better, the grounding is better, and people come back. I mean, he's writing about all this stuff. People are coming back with kind of amazing results in terms of they're doing labs with this stuff too, so they're seeing the changes that are going on at the cellular level. So we know that there's something going on there, and I don't know why there's any denial that that we are electrical creatures. I mean, when I explain this to people, I think they have such a hard time accepting this. And my field is one of the more bizarre ones, because I as a craniosacral therapist, we have to learn to feel the motion of cerebrospinal fluid within the system.
Mm.
And so, you know to me, since we have this saline tide moving through our nervous system, it seems only natural that we must be electrical. I mean, that, why else would it be saline? So that we know that that's sort of, and that's all part of the extracellular matrix. So we know that all exists. And I do think that it's a matter of, putting the importance on this, especially at a younger age. I mean, you're a pretty young guy, and I think that idea of what you're talking about, of building up resilience at a younger age. I'm fortunate enough that I started working with babies 17 years ago, and I've gotten to work with a lot of them as kids, as young kids and teenagers now. And I'm constantly trying to, give them little bits of information like this, and they're curious. I mean, I think there's a lot of room for teaching younger people about this stuff. Not to say that there's not a benefit if you're older, but I still think that really understanding how to build these lifestyle pieces in and make time for it just makes us feel better. We're emotionally more well, we're spiritually more well, we're more interconnected with people most of the time, if that's the case. And even with my work, I think, touch therapies in many ways probably, are connected to some of this, grounding work for us as well. So
Absolutely. Yeah, there
very,
is.
very, very simple.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've read, it's there is a actual electrical transfer of charge in people that, are involved with body work. And,
Mm,
they say that's why a lot of practitioners of body work become so depleted. They become like, when they're working on people, is
yeah.
because of that transfer of electrical charge. There's probably a ton of other variables in there, factors that are factoring into that. But that is one of the reasons that I think that, a lot of people that work in body work experience that.
They do definitely. I treat a lot of them, and I've certainly gone through my challenges with it, but I've learned some different techniques in terms of how to ground. But I'm since kind of learning more about, grounding mats and stuff. I'm
Mhm.
I'm I'm feeling like I want to bring this more into my practice, and I'm sure I can have it be. I had somebody, this is sort of how it started. Actually, learning about you is somebody who wanted to use the grounding mats during a session. I think had either watched one of your talks with somebody or something, and we tried it. And she's somebody who suffers from, some has been suffering from some chronic conditions, but is really doing a lot better over the last few months. And I do think that the grounding is part of it. And it's hard to identify in the moment. I sometimes I have people with so many different kinds of things going on between supplementation, medications, and trying new things, that it's always a little hard to identify.
Mhm.
But we just know that something like grounding is going to kind of neutralize a lot of things, and it's not going to cause any major reaction. So for me, I'm like, I think that's one great place to start, and then add from there. And my work is very gentle as well, so that when I'm working with someone like this, I'm always thinking, what's the smallest amount of input in to start out with. And that's the nice thing about something like grounding too.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's awesome that you mentioned that, because, ultimately that would be the most amazing thing that we could move towards, as far as implementation in the healing space, even in hospitals, in hospital
Right,
beds.
totally. That's what
Everywhere.
I've been thinking about too.
Yeah. There's so many ways that this can be easily implemented in patient care, and improving, and people that work, body workers, that they can help improve their sessions and their practice. Like, these are very easy things that can be implemented. But that definitely made me think of, and I wrote about that in the last part of the book. The different ways that this can be utilized in current healthcare and current alternative care. Like, there's so many ways, there's so many routes you can take with it. So.
Well, and it's one of the things I appreciated about. I could tell that this passion was kind of going beyond yourself, and was there someone in particular that close to you that you were starting to think about. You're talking about so many people are struggling and suffering with all these different conditions. Was it your community, family, or something around you that was also starting to motivate you?
It's so, like, the people that I've lost, and most people lose in their life, are due to some chronic disease,
Yeah.
some chronic communicable condition. And, I just think about, how many more days, how many more weeks or months could I have had with this person if
Hmm.
we had just started a little bit sooner, if
Yeah.
we had started doing the grounding a little bit sooner, even if it would have gave me an extra hour, an extra couple hours, an extra day with that person,
Yeah.
would this have been worth it? Absolutely. And I try and see things from that perspective. How many people would be suffering less if they just knew about this practice? Because really, to me, it's kind of heartbreaking that something as simple and as effective and as obvious as grounding, the
Yeah.
electrical homeostasis, the electrical side of the body, is neglected, is just kind of heartbreaking to me. And that was the biggest reason that I started doing what I'm doing 5 years ago, is I just wanted to spread this message, which is ultimately free. Because at the same time, I do sell things. I have footwear, I have a book, I have all these different things, but you don't need to buy any of that to see these benefits. You can go
Right.
outside, you can take your shoes off, and you can
Totally.
experience that for free. You don't need to buy anything for that. So that will always be kind of the biggest thing with what I do is, it's ultimately free. And so
Yeah.
you don't need to buy anything for it. So
That's so cool. I mean, I look for more and more of these things to be part of this podcast. I think coming from being a struggling musician as a young person, and not even being insured at periods of time, and thinking more and more about how many people. I mean, I'm very fortunate that my practice has given me a career, and that I've been able to stay in private practice, and I don't have to deal with insurance and health systems and all that
mm,
stuff. So part of me is I've been wanting to just give back a little bit more in terms of there's a lot of good information out there like this, that's free, and also practices that are free, that basically keep us out of those challenges with healthcare systems and insurance and all these things that I think most people would prefer not to. And as I was saying earlier, we just want to have the energy to do more of what we want to do, and this is another one of those things that I feel like is just perfect for that.
absolutely. It's in today's kind of health space, there's somewhat of a trend that people, they follow a lot of people in the health space, and they think they have to spend all of this money and they have to do all of these advanced things for their health, modalities and supplements and all that. And that's, I think that's discouraging to a lot of people, and it makes them not want to go down this route of betterment for their health. And it's I've tried to give off the message and the vibe that I don't want to sell people on anything. What I'm trying to
Hmm.
sell people on is free. Like,
Yeah.
it's cool. Again, like what you said, it's cool that I can make a living and I can make a career out of this thing. But yeah, I mean, people can follow me and they can learn about all the things that I write about and all that. But they don't have to pay a dime for anything to see any of
Yeah.
the benefits. So
Yeah. Well, your work's so cool, man. And the book, I can't wait to share. So let us know when it's ready and available for sale, and I'll make sure I post it with everything.
yeah, Barnes and Noble is having like this printing thing, like this printing delay with a lot of their stuff, and so that's kind of delayed because it was supposed to be March 20th that I'd have the hard copies
Okay.
available. But they are 8.5 by 12, kind of textbook style. Really good paper quality, really high quality images. It's a science book. It's a cool
Science book,
fictional
but
story.
really colorful and a
Yeah,
cool story. I love it.
yeah, it's fun. A lot of heart and soul went into that thing. So I think,
Clearly.
a lot of people, if you want to know about grounding, the cool story behind it and how it's benefiting you, definitely pick it up. It's a cool. It's my expression, my kind of artful expression to the world that I hope people enjoy.
Yeah, and it feels totally heartfelt too. So I love it. It's so cool. Well, I'll make sure that the people have links to all your stuff in the show notes, and stay in touch with us. Let us know what's going on. We'll follow up. I'm trying to work on doing some in-person events too at some point,
Yeah,
with some people around the Midwest. So maybe we should plan to hook up and do some cool thing in person at some point too.
yeah. If you're in the Midwest, that would be super
I'm
easy.
in Minneapolis, so
Oh yeah,
not.
perfect. Well, I think you're like 3.5, 4 hours away from me.
Oh
So,
yeah, all right, cool,
but all right, man.
very cool. Thanks for taking this time, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I'm always grateful when people ask me to come on their podcast and talk about grounding. So I appreciate it. Thank you.